Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. Holy cannoli, it has been a hot minute since I've been able to jump on and film a video for you guys. The last couple weeks have been super crazy. The last video I posted was my May TBR video, and in that video I kind of mentioned that I was going to be traveling at the end of the month, and so that's what I did. My husband and I, we went to North Carolina. We were visiting family out there, and the day after we got home, my husband had one of the most horrible cases of like a stomach bug or food poisoning. We're not really sure exactly what caused it, but it was the most awful case I've ever seen before. Within like 4 hours, he was super dehydrated and had to go to the hospital. So it was a little scary. It was really rough for a couple days. We were just in hardcore like recovery mode, and I was just focused on making sure he was okay. So obviously I wasn't doing any filming or reading during that time. Anyways, he is 100% better now. He is all good, thankfully, and I finally am able to sit down and film a video for you guys. So for today's video, I initially was gonna do the April wrap-up video, but I think I'm gonna hold on to that because I'm not quite finished with filling in my reading journal yet and just kind of wrapping up some of my thoughts. So stay tuned for that. But for today's video, I thought it would be really fun to go ahead and do a really big book unhaul. There are a lot of books that I have been kind of stockpiling, so I could show you guys what I'm going to be unhauling and just let you guys know why I'm unhauling them. Some of these were DNFs, some of these I just didn't enjoy. Some of the books in here I just had a couple copies of, so I don't need the spare ones. And then what I'm going to be doing is taking them over to the free little libraries around me and just donating them to my local community. I feel like that's a really fun way to give back, and I've been seeing a lot of people doing that. So thankfully I have a couple of free little libraries around me, so I'll go drop them off after I'm done filming. And just a fair warning, you guys, a lot of these books are a lot of people's favorites, but for me they just didn't work, and that's okay. I would much rather donate these books and give them to people who are going to cherish them a lot more than I would, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so first up we have is The Right Move. This is by Liz Tomford. This is the second book in a series of interconnected standalones. These are sports romance books, and I actually really loved this book, but I accidentally bought a second copy, so I don't need to, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get rid of this second copy. But I loved this book. I love the characters. I felt like it was super relatable, and this was very enjoyable for me, but I just don't need 2 copies. And then the next book that I'm going to be donating is All the Light We Cannot See. This is by Anthony Doerr. So this is a World War II historical fiction, and this book actually won the Pulitzer Prize. Now, don't get me wrong, the story is incredible, but I found the writing in this book was actually really slow, and because of how slow paced this book was, it took me a long time to finish. I felt like every time I would pick it up, there were a little bit of elements that kept me engaged, but for the most part, it was pretty slow, and for that reason, I'm just not going to hang on to this one. And then the next book that I'm going to be getting rid of is Part of Your World. This is by Abby Jimenez. So this is a contemporary romance book. This is also part of a series of interconnected standalones, and there's another book within this series called Yours Truly, and I adored that book. That was one of my favorites from last year. This one for me was good, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I did the other book, and for me, romance books are more of a palate cleanser in between my fantasy reads. So if I don't see myself reading it again, I just don't see the point in keeping it, so I'll be donating this one. And then the next book is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. This is by Stuart Turton. So this is a murder mystery book that takes place in like the 1800s or like early 1900s, I forget. But this book has a really big cast of characters, and the plot is pretty interesting. This is almost like a magical realism / fantasy murder mystery kind of book, so there are a little bit of elements that make it a little more interesting and complicated. However, for me, this was just a really confusing book at times. Because of how many in-depth details I felt like were put into this book, it was just hard for me to follow and keep track of what was going on without getting confused. And I feel like this is a book that you'd have to read a couple times over for all the pieces to kind of click into place. And I think it was written so well and was so well executed that it was just a little bit too much for me. So unfortunately, because of how confusing it was, I just didn't find the reading experience as enjoyable as I would have liked it to be. So for that reason, I'm going to be getting rid of this one. And then we have Daisy Jones and the Six. This is by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is not really a romance book. I would call this a like literary fiction book, or maybe like a historical fiction book, kind of. It's about a band in the 1970s and their rise to fame and just kind of the relationships that take place between the band members. So for me, the reading experience was actually pretty fun with this book. The audiobook was really cool because you get to hear from each of the band members. So I really liked that aspect. But the storyline for me was just kind of mid. I don't feel like there was anything really special about it that makes me want to come back and read it again. I don't think I ever will. It was a cool concept, but I just feel like the story was just kind of flat for me and didn't really have anything memorable about it. So then the next book that I'll be getting rid of is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. This is by Gabrielle Zevin. So this book is about two friends who end up making a video game together. Their names are Sam and Sadie, and this basically follows their friendship as it goes from very young kids, I think like around college time, they made their first video game, and then from there the story just kind of takes off and follows them and their friendship over the course of many years. I am so bummed that I did not enjoy this book as much as everyone else did. I really, really wanted to love this book, but for me, there was insane amounts of miscommunication between our two main characters, and I understand that they were written in a way to make them feel very realistic. However, for me personally, I didn't really like them. I didn't connect with the main characters. Their miscommunication and method of fighting with each other over the course of several decades was very, very frustrating, and it made me not like the book. It just felt like a very repetitive cycle of we're friends, we get into a fight, wait, I miss you, let's make a video game together. And it was just this kind of repetitive cycle over and over and over again. And unfortunately, it just did not resonate with me. I will say there were two parts at the end that I found very redeeming. And for those of you who have read this book, you'll know what I'm talking about. And that was the NPC chapter and just the final kind of thing that happens between Sam and Sadie to kind of resolve this conflict that they're going through. I felt like those are really redeeming qualities to the book, but otherwise I just didn't really care for this at all. Next we have Crescent City 1 and 2. This is the House of Earth and Blood and then the House of Sky and Breath. So I actually have the Barnes & Noble special edition versions of these books, so I don't need two copies. But besides that, for me personally, Crescent City is my least favorite Sarah J. Maas series, especially after Crescent City 3. That book for me was a really big miss. I didn't like it at all, unfortunately. So I'm not sure if I'll end up continuing the series, but I did enjoy the first two books more than the third one. The first book was my favorite. The second book was okay for me, but in the meantime, I just don't need two copies. Next, we have Fourth Wing. This is by Rebecca Yarros. This is another very popular, very well-loved book by a lot of people. I thought the storyline of this book was very entertaining, but the writing kind of was okay for me. Now, after the whole Iron Flame debacle and just hearing all the reviews about it and kind of hearing a little bit of the spoilers for what happens in that book, I just knew that that one really wasn't for me. I feel like the second book went in a direction that I just don't care to pick up and follow up with. So for that reason, I'm not going to be continuing the series at this point. And I don't feel like I need a hardback version of this book. If I want to get another copy, I would just get the paperback edition. So I enjoyed this book. I just don't need a hardback version of it. And I would much rather donate this copy to a person who's going to cherish this and love this a lot more. Then we have the 7 Year Slip. This is by Ashley Poston. This is another really popular kind of like magical realism romance book that a lot of people love. And I really, really wanted to be a part of that bandwagon, but unfortunately for me, upon reading it, I just didn't really connect with our main characters too much. I felt like there were a lot of gaps in the plot that made the story feel less believable for me, and therefore I just didn't really care for it. This is basically about a young woman who like inherits this apartment. Basically, there's like a time traveling aspect where the apartment kind of allows there to be a 7-year gap between the time period of our main character and her love interest. And for me, the like explanation of how it happened or lack of just pulled me out of the story. I was kind of confused about it. And again, I just didn't really care for the main characters that much. So for me, this was just okay. Next, we have Powerless. This is by Lauren Roberts, and yet again, this is a super, super popular book that a lot of people love. I think I'm just in a place right now where my reading style is just transitioning, and I feel like it's just going away from the YA romance, YA fantasy books. I feel like YA murder mystery I still enjoy, but anything that involves fantasy or romance, I'm just noticing that it's not really my favorite. So in the case of Powerless, when I was reading this book, I just felt like the characters' romance was just not very believable. I didn't really enjoy the dialogue at all. I felt like it was kind of cringy at times. Forgive me, you guys. I'm not trying to bash on anyone's favorite books. These are just my experience. So I'm really just trying to be honest about my feelings, and I just didn't really care for it. The amount of times that like the word darling was used, it just gives me the ick. I just did not care for that at all. It just wasn't super believable for me. So this was like a 2-star for me. I didn't really like it at all. And then we have Belladonna. This is written by Adeline Grace. So this is kind of like a paranormal romance book. We are following a girl named Signa, and she kind of has a love interest who is kind of like a shadow man. This gave me similar vibes to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but personally I prefer Addie LaRue over this book. I felt like this was similar, but I just prefer the other one, and I don't see myself continuing this series. I think this is a trilogy currently, and I just don't see myself coming back to this world. So yeah, I just don't see myself picking it up again. And this one I'm also really bummed about. This is Legendborn by Tracy Dion. So I actually DNF'd this book. I got about 60 or like 50 or 60% of the way through the book. For me, I just felt like the world building was really messy, and I was honestly very confused by the magic system. I felt like there just wasn't a lot of explanation, and we were given information at kind of like really random points. There were some elements that I just didn't really like about it. I felt like there was one particular scene with like this therapist. I just felt like it wasn't a real representation of what therapy is like, and I just don't like that it was represented in this way. So for me personally, this was just not my favorite book. For me, it definitely felt like a YA book, and I'm just not really interested in this kind of vibe anymore. Next, we have The City of Bones and The City of Ashes. These are the first 2 books in the Mortal Instrument series by Cassandra Clare. So I actually did start reading The City of Bones, and I did DNF this book because it also just felt very young, very YA. This is like an 8 or 7 book series. I just don't care about the story enough to continue reading that many books in this series. I am very interested in reading the Infernal Devices series, but this particular series in the Shadowhunters universe, I just don't see myself reading or enjoying these ones. And then we have The Red Queen. This is by Victoria Aveyard. This is another YA fantasy book. This is another book that I got about halfway through before I decided to DNF this one as well. I honestly don't really remember too much of what this book is even about. For me, it was pretty forgettable, and I just didn't really care for it too much. Again, this just felt very YA, and I definitely noticed that YA fantasy books are just not my cup of tea anymore. I think as I've just found more of the books that I like and genres that I like, or just writing styles that I prefer, I just don't align with this kind anymore. So this one's going to be going as well. And then next we have 5 Feet Apart. This is by Rachel Lippincott. This is a YA romance book. I did read this book in April, and I actually really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really sweet and very innocent. This is following 2 teenagers who have chronic illnesses. They both have cystic fibrosis. I think the goal of this book is just to bring a lot of awareness to patients who suffer with chronic illnesses or cystic fibrosis in particular. I personally learned a lot about the illness while reading this book, and I really appreciated that element to it. However, I think just the YA romance aspect, again, just felt kind of young. The romance is just really sweet and innocent, but for me, I just don't see myself picking it up again. And then last but not least, we have Circe. This is written by Madeline Miller. I actually got about 80% of the way done with this before I DNF'd it. I love the direction that Madeline Miller kind of took this Circe retelling, but for me, this book was so slow. This is totally a character-driven book. There is not a lot of plot going on to this at all. For a long time, there's just a lot of nothing happening for what it feels like, and I just noticed myself losing interest in this book over time. So unfortunately, this book wasn't for me, but I totally get why people love it, and I loved those aspects of it, but I just didn't love it enough to want to continue reading it or finish it. Alright friends, so here are all the books that I'm going to be unhauling. Again, I'm so sorry if you guys love these books. I'm really glad that they worked for you. These just didn't work for me, and as I continue to kind of just narrow down my specific genres that I'm loving. I'm gonna be fleshing out books that just don't work for me. And like I said, I'm gonna be taking these to the free little libraries around me. Hopefully they land in the hands of people who will just totally appreciate them. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know in the comments below if you guys shared any of these feelings or if any of these were your favorite books. I would love to have a conversation about them. Give this video a thumbs up if you guys want to see more videos like this. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you want to keep following along my reading journey. And that's about it, you guys. Happy reading, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.